Dark days. Imagine having a family and being unable to provide for them. You have no work, no income, and no opportunity to fulfill even their basic needs, such as food and shelter. Sadly, many Americans found themselves in this desperate situation during the period known as the Great Depression. This economic disaster occurred in the United States between 1929 and 1942. During the Great Depression, few jobs were available for workers, even those who had families depending on them. This shortage of work caused a vast number of people to lack the money they needed to pay for food, clothing, and shelter. Consequently, these people found themselves living in poverty. The United States and its citizens have continued to feel the effects of this catastrophic era. Today, economists have studied this period, hoping to determine the causes in order to avoid similar economic events. These financial analysts have concluded that the combination of low demand for goods and services, unfortunate financial decisions, and a devastating natural disaster culminated in the Great Depression. In an economy, demand occurs when people have the need or desire to purchase goods and services. Middle-class earners, those who are neither wealthy nor poor, have the greatest impact on the economy of a country. Wealthy people tend to invest or save their money, while the poor have little or no money to spend. Middle-class citizens are most likely to make purchases with the money earned from their jobs. They use their earnings to pay for basic needs, such as food and electricity, and also spend money on luxury items, such as cars, clothing, and furniture. During the 1920s, the middle class in the United States began to grow poorer. Farmers were unable to pay their bank loans and lost their property. As a result, they moved to cities and accepted low-paying jobs in order to feed their families. At the end of World War I, military personnel and employees at weapons factories lost their jobs because they were no longer needed. They too required work so they could provide for their families. These situations resulted in an overabundance of workers for a limited number of jobs. As the number of available workers increased, business owners determined that they could hire people who would accept minimal wages. Soon, those in the middle class became financially unstable because they were making less money. Most people had only enough money to fulfill their basic needs without extra money for luxuries. This lack of income caused middle-class consumers to demand fewer goods and services. As more citizens had less expendable income to make purchases, many businesses could not remain profitable and eventually closed. The failure of hundreds of businesses due to low demand for their goods and services is one likely reason for the Great Depression. Another factor that led to the Great Depression was the crash of the stock market. A stock is a share of ownership in a company. When people buy stock in a business, they are actually purchasing part of that business. The stock market is the place where stocks are bought and sold. During 1926, a large number of investors buying stock participated in speculation. Speculation occurs when stocks are purchased for a price they might be worth in the future. This strategy is a risky move because stocks may never be worth their speculated values. This guesswork proved to have devastating effects when many stocks stopped increasing in value in late 1929. As a result, many people tried to sell their stocks at a time when no one would purchase them. More sellers than buyers caused the continued decrease in the value of stocks. On October 29, 1929, known as Black Tuesday, The value of a large number of stocks fell so low that many wealthy investors lost their life savings. Companies and banks that had stocks to sell went bankrupt because the stock was worth so little. Many economists consider Black Tuesday the start of the Great Depression. After Black Tuesday, investors stopped buying stocks. Instead, they saved their money. It was apparent there was a shortage of currency. When people went to their banks to withdraw cash they needed from their accounts, the banks did not have the money to give them. Thousands of banks failed when they could not meet their customers' demands for cash, causing millions of people to lose the money they had saved. Financial analysts believe the failure of the banks and the stock market is the primary cause of the Great Depression. America was already in the midst of the Great Depression when natural disasters worsened and prolonged its effects. In the late 1920s and 1930s, drought conditions made it difficult for farmers to sustain their crops. Some farmers abandoned their farms, leaving fields with little vegetation. Other farmers replaced native plants with non-native crops in an attempt to earn greater profits. This overplanting resulted in land that could no longer produce. Consequently, land that was once covered with productive fields became dry and dusty. So much loose dirt covered the land that winds picked up the soil and created horrendous dust storms. Farms, homes, and cars were covered with thick layers of dust. Farmers and their families lost everything and were forced to pack their belongings and move into cities to locate work. The definitive causes of the Great Depression continue to be debated. However, economists agree there are lessons to be learned from this challenging era. Those who understand the historical conditions of this difficult period will surely be mindful of the past in order to prevent future disasters. Culture shock. President Franklin D. Roosevelt once said, "We have always held to the hope, the belief, the conviction that there is a better life, a better world, well beyond the horizon." President Roosevelt took office in 1933, pledging to give America relief from the Great Depression. The citizens of the country had struggled to merely survive. The hardships of this economic catastrophe left physical and emotional scars on men, women, and children. They had experienced the worst, but had learned lessons and were hopeful about the days ahead. During the Great Depression, families in the United States experienced significant lifestyle changes. Some families moved from place to place in order to find work. Often, fathers lost their jobs and experienced pay cuts, forcing mothers to work outside the home. Children were left unsupervised. Older children were forced to quit school so they could look for work to support their families. Even younger children dropped out of school to perform household chores. Often families could not afford to remain in their houses, so they moved to shanty towns which had no electricity or running water. Privacy was almost non-existent in these tight quarters where families lived in makeshift homes. However, these substantial changes in the family structure also positively impacted families and communities. Many Americans learned the benefit of helping others as well as receiving aid from government relief programs. Family members and friends supported each other, realizing the necessity of sharing what little they had. People also learned that they could live on less and come to understand the difference between needs and wants. Philanthropy increased because those who were able to maintain their wealth shared with the less fortunate. Americans also learned that they could express their sadness and disappointment through the arts. Musicians fused blues and folk music to issue a call for change and shared the voice of hope. This music spread across the country, uniting citizens in a common cause. Folk art made a resurgence as many artists produced sculptures or pictures to express themselves. Photographers captured and shared some of the most enduring images we have of this time period. Authors explored the world of poverty, giving readers the opportunity to relate to realistic characters and events. Other literature was written to encourage people to believe in a brighter future. Ultimately, the Great Depression showed Americans that they wanted the same things: safety and security for themselves and their loved ones. Through the lessons they learned, people realized that in the most desperate of situations, hope remains alive. Questions. Use dark days to answer questions 1 to 6. Then fill in the circle for each answer. Number 1. Read this dictionary entry. Which definition matches the meaning of vast in paragraph 2? A. Definition 1. Great in quantity. B. Definition 2. Great in area. 3. Definition 3. Great in size. 4. Definition 4. Great in degree. Question 2. The author wrote this selection most likely to explain F. Why the Great Depression occurred. G. How the Great Depression affected banks. H. How people coped with the Great Depression. J. Why people could not find jobs during the Great Depression. Question 3. The author included paragraph 1 to A. Provide the reader with an imaginary situation from the Great Depression. B. Require the reader to consider the viewpoint of the author. C. Help the reader relate to the severity of the Great Depression. D. Support the reader's identification of the main idea and supporting details. Question 4. Which sentence best expresses the main idea of the selection? F. The Great Depression was the result of investors and bankers who made risky financial decisions that jeopardized the life savings of Americans. G. During the Great Depression, women and children had no choice but to join the workforce because many men were not able to find jobs that paid enough to support their families. H. As a result of the Great Depression, many people tried to take their savings out of banks, but banks made bad financial decisions, closed their doors, and left Americans penniless. J. The Great Depression was a financial tragedy in the 20th century that was a result of the effects of a decreased demand for products, poor economic choices, and devastating natural events. Question 5. Read this sentence from paragraph 5. As a result, they moved to cities and accepted low-paying jobs in order to feed their families. This sentence shows that A. People made sacrifices. B. Farmers knew how to change. C. People were often mistreated. D. Farmers were tired of harvesting. Question 6. Look at the diagram. Causes of the Great Depression: decreased consumer needs, blank, environmental disasters. Which of the following belongs in the empty box? F. Bank failures. G. Farming catastrophes. H. Unwise money management. J. Abundance of skilled workers. Use culture shock to answer questions 7 through 12. Question 7. The author structures paragraphs 2 through 4 so that they A. Explain a situation and describe how Americans disregarded it. B. Describe an issue with facts and opinions about Americans and their characteristics. C. Compare and contrast how different Americans approached lifestyle changes. D. Present a problem and explain how Americans responded to it. Question number 8. Based on information in the selection, with which statement would the author most likely agree? F. Americans will always depend on the government to give them support. G. Americans face hardships with strength and determination. H. Americans know how to educate themselves when facing unknown situations. J. Americans are unsure of themselves when faced with tragedy. Question 9. The author includes the quote in paragraph 1 to highlight the idea that A. Americans trust in the beliefs of the president. B. Presidents know that the future will improve. C. A brighter future is a common American belief. D. Looking forward is essential to success. Question 10. The message conveyed by the photograph below paragraph 2 is that F. During the Great Depression, many Americans found themselves in miserable living conditions. G. The Great Depression allowed many families to bond and grow closer together. H. During the Great Depression, many people received support from the government. J. The Great Depression provided new work opportunities for migrant workers and their families. Question 11. Which sentence from the selection suggests that the author thinks Americans are adaptable? A. During the Great Depression, families in the United States experienced significant lifestyle changes. B. However, these substantial changes in the family structure also positively affected families and communities. C. People also learned that they could live on less and came to understand the difference between needs and wants. D. Authors explored the world of poverty, giving readers the opportunity to relate to realistic characters and events. Question 12. Which evidence does the author give to support the claim that during the Great Depression Americans were resilient? F. People changed the situation and learned how to work together to earn money. G. People adjusted their expectations, supported one another, and used the arts to express themselves. H. People used artistic expression such as music, sculpture, and literature to express their feelings. J. People moved to places they could afford and forced all family members to contribute. Use Dark Days and Culture Shock to answer questions 13 through 16. 13. How do the purposes of the selections differ? A. Dark Days emphasizes changes to the economy during the Great Depression, while Culture Shock emphasizes the strength of the government during this period. B. Dark Days focuses on the causes of the Great Depression, while Culture Shock focuses on how people adapted to the conditions. C. Dark Days examines citizens and their responses during the Great Depression, while Culture Shock examines the government and its responses during this economic downturn. D. Dark Days highlights how businesses united during the Great Depression, while Culture Shock highlights the long-term outcomes of this historical event. Question 14. Which statement could be supported by both selections? F. The Great Depression was a time of much distrust. G. The Great Depression was a time when Americans had unlimited freedom. H. The Great Depression was a time when Americans tried new careers. J. The Great Depression was a time of significant change. Question 15. Information in both selections suggests that the Great Depression A. forced people to rethink their investment strategies. B. Eliminated people's dependence on American farmers. C. encouraged people to work together towards a common goal. D. Required people to change their points of view about life and work. Question 16. What is one difference between the selections? F. The authors have different beliefs about the Great Depression and its causes. G. The authors have different ideas about the jobs available during the Great Depression. H. The authors have different views of how the Great Depression affected Americans. J. The authors have different opinions on Americans' responses to the Great Depression. Dark Days.